Emily Parker's morning had started like any other, except that nothing about airports was ever simple. She clutched her travel mug of lukewarm coffee, weaving through the throngs of travelers at Toronto Pearson Airport, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her suitcase, upright and overstuffed, wobbled behind her. She tried to focus on her emails, the endless string of notifications from work, but the chaos around her made it almost impossible. She had a 3-day business trip to Seattle, filled with back-to-back presentations and networking events. Normally, she didn't mind these trips. The hotel rooms, the quiet plane rides, the chance to leave Boston for a few days, it sounded like freedom. But this morning, something about the crowd, the noise, and her overpacked schedule made everything feel heavier. As she stood in line at the small coffee kiosk near her gate, she finally allowed herself a breath. Her thumb scrolled aimlessly on her phone screen, past emails from her boss reminding her of deadlines, past news alerts, and past messages from friends she hadn't replied to in days. Then, the speaker above crackled, interrupting the rhythm of the crowd. "Attention passengers on Flight 417 to Seattle. Departure has been delayed due to weather conditions. We apologize for the inconvenience." Emily's stomach sank. A delay. She pinched the bridge of her nose. This was the last thing she needed. A storm was rolling through Seattle, and now she'd have to wait, maybe hours, in this crowded, noisy terminal. She felt the familiar tug of frustration, the one that came when life refused to follow her carefully made plans. She stepped aside, coffee in hand, and glanced around. Travelers huffed, pulled at their bags, muttering under their breath. Some settled onto the hard chairs, resigned to wait. Others moved quickly, calling family members or checking flights for alternatives. Emily felt herself drift into the background, wanting nothing more than to be anywhere else. Then, a voice spoke beside her. "Looks like we're both stuck." Startled, she turned. A man stood there, tall, with dark hair that looked as if it had a mind of its own and a navy blazer that somehow made him look relaxed even in a sea of stressed travelers. He held a boarding pass in one hand, and his other hand was casually in his pocket. There was something approachable about him, a quiet ease. "I guess so," Emily replied, a small smile escaping despite her irritation. "I'm Daniel," he said, offering his hand. "Emily," she said, shaking his hand. It was firm, warm, and surprisingly comforting in the chaos of the terminal. He tilted his head slightly, studying her briefly. "Seattle for work too?" She nodded. "Yes, conference." "You?" "Same," he said with a light laugh. "I'm guessing half the plane tomorrow will be sitting in the same sessions and pretending to network." Emily chuckled softly. She usually avoided small talk with strangers, especially in airports. But Daniel had an effortless way of speaking that didn't feel awkward or forced. It felt natural. "So," he continued, glancing at the departure board overhead, "any chance you've found the secret spot in this terminal where delays don't feel painful?" Emily raised a brow, amused. "If I had, I wouldn't tell anyone." He laughed, a soft, easy sound that blended into the background hum of announcements and rolling luggage. And for a fleeting second, Emily realized she hadn't felt this calm in weeks. There was something about his presence that made the stress of the day fade just a little. They lingered near the coffee stand, watching people shuffle past, waiting for the next announcement. Emily noted his quiet patience, the way he didn't rush, the way he seemed genuinely interested in the conversation. She usually avoided strangers, but there was a spark of connection here, small and unexpected. The delay stretched on. Minutes turned into hours. Emily found herself laughing at Daniel's stories about past work trips gone wrong, missing luggage, confusing hotel bookings, and flights that seemed determined to test human patience. She shared small anecdotes herself, carefully chosen, just enough to reveal pieces of herself without overexposing. Time moved strangely in the terminal. The rain outside the large glass windows painted the tarmac in streaks of gray. The storm made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Emily noticed that her hands, clutching the coffee, weren't shaking as they usually did under stress. Her thoughts weren't racing as wildly as they normally would. She was present. Finally, a change in the board lit up their flight as boarding soon. Emily felt a pang of disappointment. She realized she hadn't wanted to leave the conversation behind. Normally, these fleeting airport encounters ended as quickly as they began. She had half a mind to excuse herself from the boarding line, just to keep talking. When they boarded, fate seemed to tease her. The airline assigned them seats close to each other. Daniel was in the aisle, Emily by the middle, and the empty seat between them felt like a bridge neither of them wanted to leave empty. "I promise I don't snore," Daniel whispered with a grin. Emily laughed. "Good. I drool." They settled in, the plane filling around them. The hum of engines and the occasional call from the flight attendants created a cocoon of sound that seemed to isolate them from the world. Neither slept. Instead, they talked quietly, voices low, leaning toward one another across the narrow gap between seats. They spoke of work, yes, but also of life outside it, dreams, regrets, moments that shaped who they were. Emily found herself confessing things she usually kept to herself, the restless feeling that her life, while successful, lacked something she couldn't name. Daniel listened, really listened, without judgment, his eyes steady on hers even as the plane hummed around them. A sudden jolt from turbulence made Emily squeeze the armrest. Daniel's hand brushed hers. A brief, accidental touch. Neither pulled away. It was a small, fleeting connection, yet it left an imprint on her senses she couldn't ignore. By the time the plane descended into Seattle, Emily's thoughts were tangled. She didn't know him. She barely knew his last name. And yet, the hours they had shared felt significant, almost intimate. She realized that this delay, this unexpected conversation with a stranger, had brought something into her life she hadn't anticipated, a flicker of connection, of curiosity, of something deeper. As she gathered her things and stepped off the plane, Emily glanced at Daniel. He returned the look with a quiet smile, the kind that made her heart skip unexpectedly. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't even know if she'd see him outside the airport. And yet, a thought settled in her mind: some encounters, even brief ones, had the power to change the course of your day, or perhaps something much more. The Seattle rain fell steadily as Emily wheeled her suitcase toward the hotel. She kept replaying the flight in her mind, the turbulence, the small touches, the way Daniel had listened. She knew she shouldn't be thinking about him. After all, he was just another stranger she met on a business trip. But somehow, he wasn't just anything. The hotel lobby was warm, a sharp contrast to the gray skies outside. She checked in quickly, dropping her bags near the elevator. Then, she wandered toward the cafe tucked in a corner of the lobby, craving a quiet moment and maybe a fresh coffee. To her surprise, Daniel was there. He was leaning against the counter, scanning the menu, his dark hair damp from the drizzle outside. When he noticed her, his face brightened with that same easy smile. "Emily," he said, gesturing to the empty chair at his table. "Care to join me?" Normally, she would have hesitated. Business trips were for schedules, for work, for keeping things professional. But something in Daniel's eyes made her feel invited, like it was okay to pause life for a moment. She slid into the chair across from him. "Coffee?" he asked. "Absolutely," she replied, smiling. Minutes passed as their drinks arrived. Steam curled from their cups, carrying the scent of roasted beans and the quiet calm of a rainy city. The first sips were easy, comfortable, almost meditative, but it wasn't long before conversation flowed again. They started with safe topics: the conference, the schedule, the city. Emily learned Daniel worked in urban planning in Portland, balancing long hours and big projects. He asked about her marketing job, genuinely curious about her day-to-day life. "Marketing sounds stressful," he said softly. "Do you get any time to breathe?" Emily laughed, a little wryly. "Sometimes I forget what breathing feels like." He nodded knowingly, not laughing at her but with her, sharing an unspoken understanding. Emily realized she had said that exact phrase to no one, not even her closest friends. Yet here, in this temporary cafe in a city far from home, it felt safe. The storm outside intensified, drumming against the windows. The cafe felt small and quiet, as though the world outside had paused. Emily noticed the way Daniel leaned slightly forward, attentive, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. There was no judgment in his gaze, just interest. "You sound like someone who works too much," he said gently. "Is it that obvious?" she teased. "Only because I've been there," he admitted. "I know the feeling of thinking work is all there is, when really, it's just one part of life." Emily considered that, her mind wandering to the nights spent alone in her apartment, scrolling through social media, feeling the weight of routine. She hadn't spoken about her loneliness to anyone in a long time. Somehow, she told him anyway. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He nodded at moments, just enough to show he was present. He shared bits of his own story too, a recent move, the strain of leaving friends behind, the quiet longing for something more. Emily realized they were opening up faster than she normally allowed herself. Hours slipped by without notice. The storm outside didn't matter, the delay no longer felt like an inconvenience. They laughed together at small, silly stories, misplaced documents, wrong hotel bookings, confusing directions. And then, as quickly as the laughter came, the tone softened. They talked about choices, regrets, and the paths that led them here. Emily felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. She didn't know why she trusted him so quickly. She didn't even know how it had happened. But something about the way he looked at her, patient, unhurried, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Time became irrelevant until an announcement broke the spell: boarding for their flight was imminent. Emily felt a strange tug of disappointment. She hadn't wanted the conversation to end. She had never expected to care about a stranger's presence so much, yet she did. On the plane, fate nudged them together again. She found her seat next to the middle, Daniel on the aisle, the empty seat between them feeling like a small barrier neither wanted to keep. "I don't snore," he whispered with a grin. "Good," she said, smiling back. "I drool." They settled in as the plane hummed around them, engines warming up for takeoff. They didn't sleep. Instead, they leaned slightly toward each other, talking quietly in the dim cabin light. They spoke less about work now, more about life. Childhood dreams, awkward first jobs, the relationships that left scars. Emily shared pieces of herself she normally kept private, and Daniel did the same. She noticed the way he remembered details, the way he asked questions that made her feel genuinely heard. A sudden jolt of turbulence made Emily squeeze the armrest. Daniel's hand brushed hers, lightly, almost by accident. Neither moved away. A small, electric moment passed between them, simple, fleeting, yet enough to make her pulse quicken. The hours on the plane felt like minutes. Emily realized something she hadn't expected: she didn't want the trip to end. She didn't want the conversation to end. She didn't even want the stranger next to her to remain just a stranger. When the plane finally descended into Seattle, the city welcomed them with gray skies and steady rain. They collected their luggage and walked through the terminal together, slower than necessary. Neither spoke much. Words weren't needed. The quiet companionship, the shared glances, the subtle smiles said enough. "So," Daniel said, adjusting his bag, "coffee tomorrow before the conference?" Emily hesitated. Business trips were for schedules, not personal connections. But she felt a flutter she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah," she said finally. "I'd like that." The night stretched ahead, conference sessions looming in the days to come. But right now, there was rain, and a city that felt half strange, half inviting, and a man who had quietly entered her thoughts in a way no one else had. Emily lay in her hotel room that night, staring at the ceiling. Her suitcase was unpacked, her clothes neatly folded, but her mind wasn't on logistics. It was on Daniel. On their shared laughter, the quiet confessions, the brief touch on the plane. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different path, one where this wasn't a fleeting encounter, one where she didn't have to return to routine and responsibilities. But she pushed the thought aside, telling herself it was just a business trip. A coincidence. A random moment of human connection. And yet, her heart disagreed. Somewhere in Seattle, in the quiet of the hotel corridor, something unexpected had begun. Something fragile, uncertain, yet undeniable. Emily didn't know what it was, and she didn't know what would happen next. But she felt it, a pull, a curiosity, a quiet hope. Tomorrow, the conference would start. Networking, presentations, schedules, meetings. She would be Emily Parker, professional, focused, prepared. But tonight, she was just Emily. And for the first time in a long while, that felt enough. Seattle was gray and wet, but somehow that suited Emily's mood. She pulled her coat tighter and followed Daniel through the bustling streets, umbrellas bobbing around them. The conference loomed ahead, a mix of business and obligation, but for now, the city felt like their own little world. Daniel had suggested coffee before the first session. She agreed without hesitation, surprising herself. It wasn't just about caffeine, it was about prolonging the small bubble they'd created in the airport, on the plane, and in the hotel lobby. The cafe they chose was small, tucked on a quiet street. The smell of roasted beans and fresh pastries greeted them. They found a corner table near the window, a view of rain-streaked streets and pedestrians hurrying past. For a moment, it was easy to forget they were supposed to be in Seattle for work. They talked like they had all the time in the world. Daniel asked about her family, her childhood, the quiet dreams she had abandoned. Emily asked about his life in Portland, how he spent weekends, what drew him to urban planning. Every answer was met with curiosity, every story with understanding. It was easy. It was comfortable. And Emily realized she hadn't felt this relaxed in months. The professional walls she wore like armor melted away in his presence. She didn't need to impress him. She didn't need to perform. She could simply be. You know, Daniel said, stirring his coffee slowly, I usually don't open up this quickly to people I just meet. Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Really? Because here I am, spilling my deepest fears before breakfast. He laughed softly. You make it easy. The rain outside intensified, tapping rhythmically against the window. Emily noticed the way Daniel's eyes followed her as she spoke, patient, attentive, not just listening, but understanding. She felt a small warmth in her chest, one that surprised her. She wasn't used to this kind of connection. Most conversations ended before they got meaningful, or she left a room feeling like no one truly heard her. But Daniel, he was different. They left the cafe and wandered along the waterfront, the smell of the sea mingling with the scent of wet asphalt. The city was quiet under the rain, the usual crowd thinned by umbrellas and wet coats. Emily and Daniel walked side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, content in each other's presence. You keep making this feel easy, Emily said finally, her voice soft. Maybe it is, he replied. Or maybe we're both tired of pretending. She looked at him, caught off guard. Pretending what? He shrugged lightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. That life is simple, that feelings are easy to ignore. Sometimes you meet someone and it's not supposed to be simple. And ignoring it doesn't help anyone. Emily's stomach fluttered. He wasn't saying anything inappropriate. He wasn't moving too close. He wasn't rushing her. He was just honest. And honesty in moments like this felt almost dangerous. The afternoon passed quickly. They wandered through the Pike Place market, sampling pastries, laughing at the chaos of street performers and tourists. Emily noticed how he noticed small things, a vendor arranging flowers, a musician struggling with a guitar string. Daniel's attention to detail wasn't just professional, it was personal, thoughtful, almost tender. By evening, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and they found themselves under the same awning outside a small restaurant. The streets glistened with reflections of neon signs and streetlights. Emily shivered slightly, and Daniel moved closer, though not intrusively. We keep doing this, she said softly. Doing what? Pretending this is casual. Daniel's gaze softened. It doesn't feel casual to me. Her breath caught. She wanted to argue, to deny it, to remind herself this was temporary, but her heart refused. Instead, she nodded, words failing her. At that moment, his phone buzzed. He checked it, and a shadow passed over his face. The warmth between them faltered slightly. "I need to take this," he said, his voice careful. Emily nodded, disappointment tugging at her chest. "Of course." He stepped aside, talking quietly on the phone. When he returned, his smile was polite but thinner, a quiet reminder that real life always intruded. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, hesitant. "Yeah. Just work stuff," he said. But his eyes betrayed a hint of stress, a reminder that he had obligations beyond this moment. They said goodnight shortly after, parting in the hotel lobby. Emily walked to her room feeling a strange mix of warmth and emptiness. The hours they had spent together had opened a door she hadn't realized she was ready to open. But the door wasn't closed, it simply waited. That night, she lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. She replayed their conversations, the laughter, the quiet confessions, the gentle touches. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket, remembering the brush of his hand on the plane. She hadn't felt this connection in years, not since a past relationship that had ended quietly, leaving a lingering ache she thought she had moved past. She thought about the way he had looked at her today, patient, understanding, not rushing, not demanding, just present. She realized she was already longing for tomorrow, for another moment, another conversation. And she felt a fear too, fear that this might be fleeting, a moment suspended between two lives that didn't fully intersect. She didn't want to be disappointed. She didn't want to overthink it. But part of her couldn't stop. The conference would start in the morning. Meetings, presentations, networking events, all the carefully structured chaos of a business trip. She was supposed to focus on work, on tasks, on goals. But Daniel lingered in her mind, a quiet presence that refused to be ignored. She told herself it was just a coincidence, just a brief connection during travel, a story she would tell herself she could forget. But her heart argued otherwise. And somewhere in the quiet of her hotel room, Emily realized something she hadn't expected. She wanted to see him again. She wanted to hear him laugh. She wanted to feel that quiet understanding that had made hours pass like minutes. The city outside her window glowed faintly, reflections of neon and streetlights shimmering on wet streets. She pictured him walking through those same streets, unaware that she was thinking of him, wondering if he felt the same pull, the same curiosity, the same tension between should be professional and can't ignore this. Tomorrow, she would meet him before the conference. And maybe, just maybe, something more would begin. But tonight, she simply let herself imagine. She imagined a walk in the rain, a quiet conversation, a moment where everything else faded and it was just them. She imagined the possibility of connection, of laughter, of small moments that mattered more than she had realized they could. And she drifted to sleep with a quiet hope she hadn't felt in a long time, a hope that Seattle wasn't just a stop on a business trip, but the beginning of something unexpected, something gentle, something real. The final morning in Seattle arrived faster than Emily expected. The city was quiet under the soft gray sky, the rain reduced to a drizzle that reflected the city lights on the wet streets. She packed her bag quickly, her mind buzzing with anticipation and worry. Today, the conference ended, and she would head home. Daniel's flight was earlier than hers, and the thought of leaving the city, and him, made her chest tighten. She tried to distract herself with the conference sessions, shaking hands with new contacts, making notes in her planner, attending presentations. Yet, every few minutes, her thoughts drifted back to him. She remembered the way he had smiled, the way his eyes held her attention when she spoke, the quiet warmth of his presence in a city full of strangers. When she finally saw him near the hotel lobby, pulling his suitcase behind him, a rush of emotions hit her. Relief, excitement, fear, and longing all tangled together. He looked up, noticed her, and his face lit with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "Heading to the airport?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, though she knew it wasn't. Daniel nodded, adjusting the strap of his bag. "Yeah. Early flight. Her heart sank a little. Mine's later. They walked together toward the street, neither speaking immediately. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was heavy with everything unsaid. Every laugh, every shared story, every small touch between them seemed to hang in the air, suspended in time. "I'm glad we met," Emily said finally, her voice soft. "So am I," he replied. His eyes met hers, and she felt a flicker of warmth. They paused outside the hotel, rolling suitcases at their feet, rain glistening on the sidewalk. Around them, the city moved on, passengers hurrying, taxis honking, umbrellas bobbing, but for those moments, the world felt still. A pause stretched between them, the kind that could carry words or silence. Words that could make promises, or regrets, or confessions. Emily wanted to say something profound, something that would keep this moment from ending. "I didn't expect," Daniel started, then faltered. "Me neither," she said softly, finishing his sentence without fully knowing what she meant. He gave a small, sad smile. "Life's complicated." "It is," she agreed. The quiet lingered. Her instinct told her to reach for him, to bridge the gap between strangers who weren't quite strangers anymore. But she didn't. Instead, Daniel squeezed her hand, gentle, warm, and lingering enough to leave her wanting more. Then he stepped back. He hoisted his bag, gave one last nod, and walked toward the curb to hail a cab. Emily watched, feeling a tug of loss she hadn't anticipated. Her chest ached with longing, the kind that comes from knowing something good might be slipping away. Back in her hotel room, Emily lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The city outside glimmered faintly, neon and streetlights reflecting off wet streets, but her mind wasn't on the view. It was on him, Daniel. On their laughter, the quiet talks, the shared moments in cafes and airport terminals. She traced the memories, replaying the way he listened, the way he understood her without words. She told herself this was just a trip, a brief encounter, a coincidence. But her heart refused to accept it. She had felt something real, something unexpected, and it had left its mark. Hours passed, and Emily returned home. Boston welcomed her with cold streets and familiar routines, emails piling up, errands to catch up on. But nothing felt as pressing as the memory of Daniel. She went through her day on autopilot, the mundane tasks now tinged with a quiet longing for something she couldn't name. Then, one evening, a message appeared on her phone. Her heart skipped. She recognized the number before opening it. "Daniel. I keep thinking about Seattle. About you. Would it be strange to say I wish that trip hadn't ended?" Emily stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't dared to hope. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What should she say? Something casual? Something careful? Or something honest? Finally, she typed slowly. "Emily. I never expected what happened on that business trip either. But I'm really glad it did." She hit send, her heart beating wildly, the city lights outside her window casting soft reflections across the room. Daniel responded almost immediately. "Daniel. Me too. Maybe we can see each other again?" Emily smiled, a mix of relief and excitement washing over her. The idea seemed simple, yet impossible. Lives, cities, schedules, all the practicalities of adult life made everything complicated. And yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt that something she wanted might actually be possible. The next few weeks were a flurry of texts and phone calls. They talked about mundane things, work, travel, favorite meals, but also about deeper matters, hopes, fears, dreams. Each conversation strengthened the connection that had begun in Seattle, proving it wasn't just a fleeting moment. Emily thought often about that first delay at the airport, the long conversations on the plane, the walk through rainy Seattle streets. That trip, which had begun with inconvenience and stress, had turned into something that changed her perspective. It reminded her that life could surprise you, that connection could appear in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, the moments that weren't planned were the ones that mattered most. And Daniel? He had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, the quiet thrill of being seen, of being understood, of sharing laughter and silences with someone who mattered. He had made her feel alive in the midst of routine and responsibility. Months passed. Seattle felt like a memory, distant yet vivid. Emily returned to her life, her routines, her work, but the memory of that trip stayed with her, a gentle, persistent presence. And then, one weekend, Daniel appeared at her door in Boston, suitcase in hand, with a smile that made her heart leap. They embraced briefly, the kind of hug that spoke of longing, absence, and anticipation all at once. Words weren't necessary. The connection they had built in Seattle, in that short span of days, picked up where it left off. And for the first time, Emily allowed herself to hope, not just for moments, but for a future, even if uncertain. Sometimes, she thought, life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. A delayed flight, a chance conversation, a stranger sitting across from you with a smile, you never knew what could happen. And when it did, when it broke through the ordinary and reached the heart, it was worth every twist, every pause, every uncertainty. In the end, Seattle had given her more than she could have imagined. It had given her connection, laughter, understanding, and a reminder that life, despite all its routines, could still surprise you with something beautiful. And in the quiet of her apartment that night, Emily smiled, her heart full, knowing that sometimes, the unexpected was the best thing that could ever happen.